All right, hello everyone. Now this video I'm going to be exploring particular aspects of topic 2 in regards to beginning to deepen and broaden your approach, your philosophical and research-based and theory-based approach to classroom management, with particular reference to the reading from the core text. So pages 83 to 123, the chapter there in regards to the explorations from a theoretical research-based perspective using the circle of courage in regards to understanding how as teachers we approach classroom management in that regard to having a clear philosophy, a clear grounding, a base, a strong base to work with, and develop your own personal classroom management plan, how that might look like for yourself in the classroom as you're going to have to do in the assessment for this unit. So what I'm going to do is just talk through some of the aspects of the tables that are on from page 78 that sort of identify the key areas in that circle of courage framework and some of the research that goes along with it. And I guess just elaborate, explore, identify, talk to some of my own experiences with these kinds of aspects of classroom management, what this philosophy means, what it might look like, how as an individual you could potentially approach some of these aspects, even in a very beginning way, as many of you are. Some of you have had some experiences in schools already and started to see these things work, or potentially put them into practice, implement them. Others, you haven't had any experiences, maybe only from your own schooling many years ago. So some of these ideas might be a little bit foreign to you, or unsure of how do I actually do this in the classroom. So I guess I'll give some examples in that regard. I would highly recommend, if you haven't watched it yet, that you do watch the video that I posted on the Facebook page in regards to building a strong classroom management philosophy that has the PowerPoint attached to it. So because I think that really is a very good starting point. And then here there's kind of moving on into the next steps in regards to that. So if you haven't yet, pause this video, watch that first video that I have posted about classroom management foundations, and do the PowerPoint as well. I think is also a really good idea. So if you haven't done that yet, please pause and go and do those activities, spend a bit of time, and then return to this. Remember, we have this week and next week, if you're looking at a time frame in regards to working through this topic. So there's plenty of time, plenty of opportunity to work through those activities. So please make an effort and do that first before beginning with this series here. So if we have a look, so I highly recommend having the textbook open in front of you while we go through this, just so you can see what I'm talking to. So the particular page I'm going to start elaborating on is page 78, the table 3.1, and the first aspect here, belonging, opportunity for attachment. So here, the key component that the table identifies, a caring relationship with a trusted adult. So again, I'm sure you would have, if you haven't yet as well, it's really important in this video, certainly to have read this chapter, so pages 83 to 123 in the McDonald text. You would have been introduced to this idea of the circle of courage, where this comes from, its relationship to resilience, to positive psychology. If you don't know what positive psychology is, the text does explain it. Again, in the initial chapter 1, there is some explanation of that. You can Google what that is. It's a very popular kind of way of approaching psychology, both on an individual and a group level. People like Martin Seligman have been forerunners. The major thinker is Martin Seligman, and then there are others. And it's proven very popular in schools. In this particular video, I won't go into my criticisms of popular psychology, positive psychology. I do have some. Those criticisms may not be so useful in this unit per se. If you're interested, please email me. I'm happy to maybe pointed towards some articles that maybe deconstruct positive psychology a little bit and some of the problems with it. I do think, however, it is a very useful approach in schools, and probably much more useful working from a basis of positive psychology in regard to thinking about student behaviour, managing students on a whole school and a class individual level, than more disciplinary or rewards and punishment-based systems. I think it does speak to, particularly in some communities and challenging school contexts. It does, I think, work a lot better in making a positive change in young people's lives as opposed to other more traditional methods of classroom and behaviour management. So from that regard, I think it's very useful. So going on that, so the circle of courage that is explored here is built upon those foundations: positive psychology, resilience, building a positive approach to managing young people and working with them. So here, the caring relationship with the trusted adult. So in practice, what the teacher says and does. So I really like just the way that this is framed, this notion of thinking about from an individual level, what is it that I need to do to ensure that I can meet these criteria. These are kind of the criteria that are being set forth for me in regards to how do I work in a positive way with young people? How do I meet what the research says that does really work in classrooms with students, and even the most difficult students out there and the most difficult school context? What does the research say that how do you build these relationships? How do you connect with young people? How do they learn to trust you that they want to then in turn learn from you? What do you do? What is it that you need to do? What do you say? What do you do? What are your actions? What's the everyday micro interactions that you make with students, and the kind of macro decisions you're making about how the classroom runs on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So again, the foundation here is that the research says that young people want to have a caring relationship with a trusted adult. Now, for some young people, that may not necessarily be their parents or anyone in their family. It may well be, but it might not be. But in order for them to learn, they do need to build this trusted relationship with an adult. And if, from year 7 all the way through to year 12, if we're looking at the secondary context, the same applies. The relationship plays out differently when they're younger compared to when they're older, but that trust does need to develop. So how does that happen? How do young people learn to trust you? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. So here, the in practice stuff on the table tells you exactly how that might happen. That a teacher who is caring and responsive, who builds connecting strategies with young people, so actually does things to connect with them in a very real way, that is explored in chapter 2 on the text, which we'll get to in further topics. Humour. You always hear, when gurus, theorists talk about classroom management strategies, those teachers who succeed, those teachers who do well and sustain their career in regards to connecting with young people and working with them, getting them to learn. Humour is always bubbles up to the surface. And if you can think of teachers in your own past that you had a good relationship with, undoubtedly humour would be a key aspect there. Now, that doesn't mean all teachers need to be clowns. They don't need to be performers like they're a comedian. I'm not saying that, and the research doesn't say that either. But learning to laugh with your students. Sometimes you want to laugh at them, trust me, because they do funny things even when they don't mean to. And that's okay too, as long as they get it, or then they're in on the joke. Sarcasm, particularly with young students, if you're sarcastic thinking you're being funny, and the young person doesn't understand it, that can go really wrong, because then they'll think they're being belittled too, that they think that they're stupid because they don't get the joke. So humour, though, in those micro interactions, those moments where you can laugh, where yes, there's something you can find funny in some of the learning content, or you share a joke with a student, or obviously appropriate within the particular classroom environment that you've made. So some humor, say direct from the students, may be off color. Maybe students may laugh when they bully a student. That's certainly not appropriate in your classroom. So humor in the right context, the right kinds of humor can be incredibly powerful in building that trusted relationship with students. Shares personal stories. Look, this is a really interesting one. Everyone's got their own particular boundaries about what they feel is appropriate to share with the young people that they work with. Some people decide, that they want to share very little. Again, I find, based on the experiences that I've had, certainly working in tough schools in Australia, and viewing other teachers, many teachers over the years, working with students in practical opportunities, learning in schools, strategic but honest, personal sharing of your life, of what's going on in your life, who you are, what you're about, what you like, what you love, what you don't like, your personal history, your personal who you are, being strategic, meaning that you're deciding what to share and what not to share. But if you do take that approach, an honest approach to sharing your personal stories, students learn to trust you, and they learn that you're a person and you're not just this face and this robot who just talks at them and dictates to them and wants them to be compliant. You become a person, and when you're a person, with all your intricacies and all your nuances and all your aspects that make you who you are, they want to learn for a person that they grow to like, and they grow to find funny, and grow to be interested in, about what's motivating you. And even if your life is very different to their own, they can find that incredibly interesting. And vice versa, the next point on the table, showing interest in the students' lives. What motivates them? What are they about? What music do they like? What TV shows are they into? What sport do they play? What they're doing at school, what they're doing outside of school, showing an interest about that. It's up to them how much they want to share, just as it's up to you how much you choose to share. And you can say, look, I'd rather not talk about that or go into that. That's my personal choice. And then you say to them, just as it's, if I ask you a question about your life, it's up to you whether or not you want to share it. And you say that, that's how we work. You decide, you make the decision about what you want to share, and I'll make those decisions, and then we'll see where the boundaries lie, and you can talk to students about that. Next point, empathetic. Empathy is just so important in teaching. It may be one of the most important aspects of the profession, from my personal perspective. I think you must have empathy for the people you're teaching, you're working with. And empathy, if you understand what that means, if you don't, look it up. Empathy is really just understanding the emotions, the feelings, the perspectives of others, and that's the idea of almost taking their position, or living in their shoes for a moment, and getting a sense of, wow, the student's dealing with X, Y, and Z, or they're really struggling here. I kind of feel that a little bit, and then want to help in response. So having empathy always positions you in the sense of wanting to support and help, and that doesn't mean all the time you need to be a shoulder to cry on. That's not actually being empathetic. Empathy to me always means supporting and being supportive. So that might mean sometimes it's not just about being an emotional sort of sponge. It's not that either. It's kind of knowing strategies on how empathy can actually support the person. And you find people in high care situations like social work and other professions, even nursing, are highly empathetic, and teachers tend to be highly empathetic. School-wide climate of respect. This is maybe something that as an individual teacher, it may be harder to shift. And some of these aspects of this chapter do talk about whole school approaches. It's sometimes much more difficult for individual teachers, particularly new teachers, to go, well, how do I do anything about school-wide climate of respect? I'm not the principal. I don't make those decisions. But each individual teacher has a part to play in that. And yes, it is directed from the school and the leadership and the strategies that the school is focusing on in regards to classroom and behaviour management. So I don't want you to concern yourself too much about that. I think, focus for now on this idea of, well, what is it that I need to do and say, and how do I need to be? What strategies do I put in place and think about, and focus on that? And yes, it can be narrow because you're just focusing on yourself. But for the time being, I think at the stage of where we're at in this course and you're learning, it's better let's just focus on, how can I best meet these particular criteria. And the last one, notices when a child is away and welcomes back. I mean, for me, that's just about that idea of being caring and responsive, that you go, okay, you've been away, you've been unwell, or you've been somewhere else for a time being, and you welcome back into the classroom. So let's go to the next aspect of the table, safe learning environment. So this is very, very important in regards to, again, young people. They want to build trust with a caring adult. They need to do so in a social environment. It's not just about you and that child that you're trying to, win over and for them to trust you. The whole environment, in order for trust to develop, it needs to be a safe learning environment. The student needs to feel safe when they walk in that door. And, first and foremost, and the table identifies it, high expectations. Teachers must have high expectations of young people, no matter what their socioeconomic background, no matter who they've been previously, their background previously, or their history in schooling. You always have high expectations. Now, some students won't always meet those expectations, but you've got to keep strong in regard, and it's hard, trust me, particularly with some difficult groups or in schools, to continue to have high expectations. You can drop, and you see it with some teachers. They expect their expectations drop to meet where they feel their students are, and then that's where the students will stay, really, if they've got nothing to achieve to. So going in line with that is the next notion on the table, saying positive youth-centered messages. So basically, it's about, hey, you can do it. It's focused on perseverance, and this ties in with positive psychology very, very much, where positive psychology focuses on character strengths, positive character strengths. So this idea of, instead of focusing on weaknesses, where psychology has for a long time been a deficit model, so focusing on those who say have a particular mental illness, and that's important. We need to support people with those issues, and sometimes down to neurochemistry, etc., trauma. But positive psychology very much goes, okay, well, what are your strengths? What are the things that you do really well, and aspects about you that make you strong? And then let's now work on those and make those a feature of your everyday life and practice. So, something like perseverance is a really good strategy to approach with young people, that if you persevere, you'll get there. And you persevere, you work on your strengths, and you keep trying, and with effort and with that sense of perseverance, you'll eventually come through even challenge that you might be facing outside of your life. Peaceful conflict resolution, so there will be conflict in your classroom, undoubtedly. It's inescapable. There will be conflict in one way or another, whether it's between you and a student, other students' internal conflict about their learning at a particular point in time. So how do you resolve conflict? And the previous video, and where the positive learning framework really of the text, McDonald text, is also founded on, is this notion that students will misbehave. Students will, you have to understand that students will misbehave. There will be conflict. They will find difficulty in the learning at some point. So what do you do? You need to walk in your classroom with tools and strategies and approaches and theory that helps you work with that, because that's what teaching is. So you've got to have that approach that, okay, well, I want to minimize the conflict in my classroom. How do I go about doing that? If conflict arises, how do I manage it in a way that resolves it quickly, hopefully, but resolves it where both parties, both yourself, say it's between you and a student, both yourself and the student feels that, okay, this has been an equal kind of exchange here, and okay, I understand what the problem was, and now we've resolved it, and that's good. We can move on. So again, you've got to come at this with this idea, and you build strategies, and this unit will go into a lot of that. Develop leadership opportunities. Again, a lot of young people want to be leaders, even you think students who may not necessarily be predisposed to wanting to be be a leader, they often want to take charge of things. I've found, sometimes we'll call them, the naughtiest boys in particular in a classroom, you give them a little bit of responsibility, a little bit of leadership, even something very small like distributing some resources for you. That kid who thinks that they've always been enemies with different teachers, and all of a sudden now they're there to help you, can work wonders. Just those small little opportunities to be a leader. So again, you think about what you can do to foster that. Focus on problem solving. So a lot of contemporary classroom management theorists take this approach. So you don't focus on the individual, you focus on the problem. So it's not about what the individual can and cannot do, or their capacities, or their character or personality. It's the problem. How do we resolve this problem? Okay, rather than you're being good or you're being naughty, it's that focus on, okay, we need to resolve this because this doesn't help things, or this doesn't work, or we can't run our classroom like this together. So let's focus on this problem. Let's manage it now, and let's then resolve it. Okay, problem solved. We move on, and you don't hold grudges. You don't, the next day say, when that student walks in, you say, oh, you better not do that again. Calling out all the time, because again, then the individual feels that it's their fault and they're being targeted. And guess what? They'll actually want to then do the same behaviour. So the idea is that when the problem arises, then you focus on it. So it's about that problem solving, and it means fighting fires all the time, but that way students don't individually necessarily feel that they're always being targeted for a particular thing they're doing, because it has a circular relationship that they'll end up coming back and doing that because they know that presses your buttons, and for them it's fun. Student voice is heard. So again, as best as you can, although as teachers we need to really dictate much of what goes on in the classroom in regards to curriculum and the way things are run and the rules enforced, etc. from the school. Students it still needs to be at least a semi-democratic environment where students feel that their voice can be heard. If they feel there is an injustice or things aren't fair, they want to speak up, and particularly as they get older. So how do you hear students' voices? How do you take that on board? What do you do with that? Mutual respect, again, is a very common aspect to a lot of these positive classroom management frameworks. Basically, this idea that you respect me, I respect you. That idea. I like to sometimes think in regards to this notion of mutual respect in a different way. So mutual respect sort of speaks to kind of an exchange relationship. So, okay, I will respect you, and then the exchange then is you respect me, and then everything works. For me, it's a different outlook. I think mutual respect is actually we both mutually respect this environment we're in, being the classroom, the school, the situation we're in, where we get the privilege to be together, that I get the privilege of teaching you guys, and you get the privilege of learning in this wonderful environment I hope to create. And the fact that we live in a reasonably safe place, Australia, compared to the rest of the world, that you get the opportunity to go to school, etc., etc. So mutual respect is actually you're both mutually respecting the space, the learning space, rather than, oh, you respect me, I respect you on an individual or group relationship. It's that if we both respect this space that we'll create together, then we can all work together well. And then everything else feeds from that. If you respect the space, you respect the property, the things in there, the actual physical things. You respect the conditions of that space, which means, I need space to talk. I need opportunity to tell you how we do things and give you opportunity to learn, and then I'll listen to you and your concerns and challenges, etc. So it's for me that's how I consider mutual respect. It's a little bit different, but I think still powerful. Community learning environment. So group cohesion and identity. Again, you're going to be working with groups, with social entities. It's easy to think of them as individuals, because what happens in much of schooling now is that each individual becomes a calculable entity, meaning that each student has a particular place on the calculations you make in terms of assessment. They have a NAPLAN score. They have different criteria that make that student either they might have particular labels: ADHD, dyslexic, high achieving student, etc. But at the end of the day, teaching is a group exercise. It's about what's going on in that environment at a particular time, the interactions between the group members and you and your place in that, how cohesive or fragmented that group is at different times of the day, week, month, year, what's going on in that school, so many factors. So, what is that group? How does that group kind of think of itself, work, identify itself, and then obviously you have the individuals within that. So in regards to that, social engagement, how do we engage as a group? How do you engage with each other, work with each other? How do I work with this group in the best way possible? And it's going to be, you can have a kind of generic set of skills and tools to use with all students, but the way you deploy those strategies and tools, the extent to which you do certain things will depend on the particular group and their makeup. In ownership for behavior and learning, so again, students need to own their behaviors and they need to own their learning. It is up to them. This is also another important aspect of the way in which you approach young people, that they must always take ownership of their behavior. It's not somebody else's fault. It is up to them. Yes, there are conditions that create certain behaviors, certainly, but they always need to own what they do, and that's really important. And they need to, when they do the wrong thing, they need to own that. And learning, it's up to them. It's teaching, you can do as much as possible to set the context, the right environment, the right learning space for students. But, they need to play the game. They need to play ball. They need to meet you halfway. So they always need to own their own learning. And, again, cooperative strategies, acceptance of others, all of this stuff feeds into this idea of, how do we work well together, accepting others' diversity and differences and individual styles and preferences for approaching the learning. All of that plays into developing that community learning environment. So the next table, the mastery aspect. So you can see how here, I've only just finished the belonging part and how many factors there are. And this is layered, this is complex. There's a lot to think about, certainly, but again, this is just slowly approaching things, getting a sense, reading, thinking about your own experiences, what others are saying, and then, again, for many of you, this is so academic because you haven't had a chance to see what's working in schools and how this might play itself out. And there's a spectrum, some schools do this really, really well. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where schools don't do this very well, or individual teachers. So it's complex. There's lots of stuff out there. It's very messy a lot of the time. Even when you're trying to do it really well, like all of this suggests, it's still messy. It's still up and down. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you just keep going and you build a repertoire of strategies. But really, again, just to reinforce, you're working from a strong foundation, and you continue to build that strong foundation for yourself, and through experience, through trial and error. But I think, certainly where this is directed, this table, is that this is what you're striving towards. This is your own set of high expectations about what you can achieve, because you can do. I've seen this work. I've seen it work really well. It can appear effortless when teachers who do this really well are practicing it, but it's not. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in the background for teachers who make this work well. So the mastery opportunity for achievement, this is about, again, engaging students in learning, this approaching how do you teach effectively, being creative, thinking about, using the curriculum that you've been given by, the CARA, Australian curriculum, which is hence then, school-based. They form a program, age and ability appropriate, being able to manipulate the curriculum in a particular way, so students can learn, and there is scope for progress. Connecting the learning you're doing in the classroom to their lives outside of school, in different ways, whatever you might be teaching. That curiosity gets developed in that, because you're attuned to their interests, and students are doing problem solving, and they're making decisions about their learning. Again, all of the research says that this is where deep, meaningful learning happens. The issue becomes is that, is something like preparing for the NAPLAN test, which happens in the English and mathematics learning areas, has none of these, unfortunately. So, and where schools tend to be dominated by some of this stuff during particular portions of the year, it's somewhat worrying. But let's not focus on the negatives for this video. We're trying to focus here on the positives. So again, in terms of this learning, this mastery style opportunity for achievement, developing competence in the classroom, that students actively construct their knowledge. So it takes a constructivist approach. They're working towards their own personal attainment. So achieving what they feel is tangible and appropriate attainment for them. And for some students, it might be getting a pass, is enough for them, and that's their personal attainment. But that you can provide those opportunities for success. I like here on this table, it says opportunities to teach. I think that could be read both ways. It's for yourself, hoping you want lots of opportunities to actually teach students, rather than just babysitting or sort of managing them just daily so they don't hurt each other or whatever. But also that students get opportunities to teach each other, or to teach the group. Developing responsibility, model and think aloud, make mistakes and discuss, authentic tasks. All of these again are the hallmarks of a really thriving, well-run classroom where learning happens in a deep way. That students feel that they can come into a room, and they then at the end of the 60-minute period, for example, they walk out and they go, yeah, wow, I learned something, or this was fun, or interesting, or engaging, or I can't wait for next lesson. That's the stuff of teaching. All of these things here, we're like, this is hopefully why you wanted to become a teacher, is to make students engage with your subject area, and they can do all these things that are on that table. But again, it's important that the basis is the belonging. That starts. That's the first part. Then the mastery, happens where students set goals for themselves. They believe they can achieve. That they've been affirmed for what they're doing, and again, they're meeting those high expectations. And then the table continues the independence, developing autonomy. They start to feel that they're part of the community. There's trust and respect, active citizenship. They start to feel more, have a sense of self-control. They make decisions. There's no coercion going on. They can reflect and give input about what's going on. All of this grows. And if you again watch the video that I posted before, this idea of a classroom ecosystem, this notion that it thrives based on what's going on, the input. So, if toxic things go in, the learning environment, the ecology will become toxic. The language, the ways in which the students interact with each other or with you becomes toxic and not a nice place to work for yourself. So how do you make it thrive? What do you put into it that there is this growing, thriving environment that is a nice place to learn? That's what you want to create. And then the last part of the table, generosity, developing altruism. Again, this is, this stuff happens. It doesn't just, you just think automatically, oh, students will be generous and have empathy and treat each other with respect. It has to, you have to scaffold it. You have to make it happen. And you have to guide it and lead it. And, if you do, and again, some of this stuff, and as you've gone through the table, it can be a lot dependent on the whole school culture and what's going on in the school, rather than individual classroom. You can make it happen a little bit, but really, this is the stuff that does go on and thread its way through the whole school culture. And if the school is geared towards it, it's much easier to happen in the classroom because it's part of the everyday practice of the whole school. So this is the sort of thing when you're thinking about, well, where am I going to be working in the future? You want to be working in schools that can meet some of these criteria in the latter parts of the table, particularly this idea of, opportunity for service and developing empathy, and how do schools make that happen in the culture of the site, rather than just the classroom, but the classroom is a microcosm of the school. So as an individual teacher, especially going out on prac, it might be much harder to do these things or see these things working. But again, think about, well, when I'm looking for work, maybe I need to be gearing myself towards schools that potentially meet some of these approaches. So I think it's critical to consider how, as an individual teacher, you're making this stuff work in your classroom, but that you have a mind to go, well, what works in whole schools, and how do school cultures develop in particular ways? Yes, it's individual teachers making individual choices, but it's also the school leadership, it's also the parents, the community involvement, etc., etc. So this stuff is complex. There's a lot of aspects to it, a lot of criteria that play into it, and I do think, just take things slow. As I said, read, engage with the theory, think about your own experiences, start to build your repertoire of understandings. Well, what is it that I need to be doing and saying, and how can I then, go towards and slowly take those small steps towards this approach, I think is quite important. So I hope this has been useful to you. Once again, thank you for engaging, and further videos will continue to explore and elaborate on these ideas.